It was Valentine's Day in Jeffersonville, Indiana, a night that was supposed to be filled with romance, soft lights, and warmth. The kind of night couples plan to rekindle love. Deborah Meyer had no idea that this evening, planned so carefully by her own husband, would become the last night of her life. The couple had been struggling for months. Their marriage carried silent tension that friends noticed but didn't fully understand. They had 3 children together, and from the outside, life looked stable enough. But inside the home, arguments had become a bitter routine. Stephen Meyer had grown increasingly paranoid, suspicious, and controlling. Deborah had grown distant, tired, and emotionally drained to the world. They were just another married couple trying to navigate life. Behind closed doors, their relationship had already begun to fracture. On February 14th, Stephen prepared something he hoped would fix everything. He set up a Paris-themed dinner. Lights, decorations, champagne, soft music. It was supposed to be romantic, an attempt to bring them closer again. But romance cannot fix problems that have been ignored for too long. When Deborah arrived, she tried to be polite, but something about her mood, her silence, her lack of enthusiasm pushed Stephen deeper into suspicion. Every look, every gesture, every pause, he interpreted it as rejection, as betrayal, as confirmation that she no longer loved him. What happened next would reveal the darkness he had been hiding for years. As they sat down at the table, Stephen's irritation grew. He claimed Deborah was acting cold, responding with short answers, avoiding eye contact. Whether it was stress, exhaustion, or discomfort, no one will ever truly know. But for Stephen, that was enough to ignite rage. His thoughts spiraled, mixing jealousy, anger, and wounded pride into something uncontrollable. The argument escalated quickly. Voices rose. Furniture shifted. At some point, rational thought disappeared completely. Fueled by a twisted combination of insecurity and fury, Stephen attacked Deborah. There was no struggle long enough to save her, no chance for escape, no moment for help. By the time authorities arrived, the romantic decorations remained untouched, a disturbing contrast to the violence that had just unfolded. A table set for a perfect night stood beside a scene that reflected the truth of their marriage, broken, twisted, and tragic. Stephen Meyer was arrested the moment police walked in. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He told investigators that he snapped because Deborah wasn't acting the way he expected. He described her as distant and cold, as if her emotional state justified the horror that followed. Those words would later become the center of national outrage. The idea that a woman lost her life because she wasn't smiling enough. Neighbors and friends stood in disbelief. Deborah had always been quiet, kind, and dedicated to her children. She was the kind of mother who put everyone else first, the kind of woman who worked through pain silently. Her friends said she had been trying her best to keep her family stable despite the tension. Her children, now left without a mother, became the most heartbreaking part of the story. In the days that followed, the community gathered to grieve. Deborah's loved ones described her as gentle and compassionate, someone who deserved far more than the violence she received. They spoke about her dreams, her patience, her love for her kids. Those who knew Stephen were stunned. They never expected such brutality from a man who appeared calm and composed. A reminder that sometimes the darkest storms happen inside people who hide them well. Detectives pieced together the timeline, matching Stephen's confession with physical evidence. There was no mystery about what happened. The tragedy was clear, simple, and devastating. A moment of rage turned a romantic evening into a deadly nightmare. The case quickly spread through news outlets across the country, sparking conversations about domestic violence, emotional manipulation, and the invisible pressure placed on women inside toxic relationships. People asked the same question again and again. How does a romantic holiday become a crime scene? How does someone who claims to love you take your life because you weren't excited enough? When the story reached court, prosecutors made one message loud and undeniable. Deborah did nothing wrong. She wasn't responsible for Stephen's insecurities, paranoia, or anger. She didn't deserve punishment for being tired, quiet, or emotionally distant. She was a victim of a husband who refused to accept boundaries and turned his own frustration into lethal violence. Stephen Meyer now faces the weight of the justice system, while Deborah's children move forward without the most important person in their lives. The Paris-themed decorations that once symbolized hope now serve as a cruel reminder of how quickly a life can be stolen. Deborah's story is not just another crime. It's a warning about the danger of unchecked anger, the silent suffering inside troubled marriages, and the fragile line between love and obsession. It stands as a reminder that every victim deserves a voice, even when they're no longer here to speak. If you found this story important, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let Deborah's story be heard and remembered. Stay safe, stay aware, and take care of the people around you. The investigation moved quickly, not because the case was complicated, but because the truth was so painfully clear. When detectives entered the Meyer home that night, the entire scene felt frozen in a moment that should never have existed. The Valentine decorations were still glowing softly, as if unaware that the evening had already transformed from romance to tragedy. A table set for two, plates untouched, candles burning quietly, all standing beside a reality that shattered the illusion of love forever. Police separated Stephen immediately, reading him his rights as he sat trembling, though not from regret, more from shock at what he had done. His shirt still carried evidence of the violence he unleashed, and he kept repeating the same line to officers. She just wasn't acting right. She was cold. She didn't care anymore. As if those words explained the unexplainable. As if her silence justified the rage. Detectives knew this kind of language. They had heard it in countless domestic violence cases. The excuses, the blame, the attempt to rewrite the narrative so the abuser feels less responsible. But in Deborah's case, the evidence spoke louder than any words Stephen offered. The timeline matched perfectly with the physical trauma. There were no signs of forced entry, no other suspects, no alternate theories. The only thing missing was a reason that made any sense. As forensic technicians worked through the home, they noticed small details that revealed the emotional battles Deborah had been fighting. A notebook filled with thoughts she never shared, text messages to close friends hinting at exhaustion, and quick searches on her phone about how to navigate unhealthy relationships. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed danger. Just the quiet desperation of someone trying to hold a family together while feeling herself slowly fade. Her children were escorted away from the home shortly after midnight, wrapped in blankets, confused and frightened. They knew something terrible had happened, but they didn't yet understand the finality of it. Deborah's oldest child kept asking if she was okay, if she would come back, if the ambulance would fix everything. No one had the heart to answer. The officers who carried the children outside knew this night would follow them for the rest of their lives. As the hours passed, Stephen's tone changed. He shifted from anger to justification, then to self-pity. He said he planned the romantic evening because he wanted to save their marriage. He said Deborah barely looked at him, that she didn't appreciate anything, that she wasn't the same person anymore. Detectives listened, not because his excuses mattered, but because his words revealed the nature of the violence. A man whose ego couldn't handle rejection, real or imagined. A man who needed control more than he needed love. The autopsy results revealed the full brutality of what Deborah endured. Every mark, every injury, every wound told the same story. This was not a momentary loss of control. It was rage let off the leash. It was possessiveness turned into punishment. It was a husband who chose violence because he believed he was entitled to her compliance, her attention, her affection, even when she had nothing left to give. When detectives presented these findings to Stephen, his reaction was chilling. He didn't break down. He didn't apologize. He didn't show a single sign of remorse. Instead, he repeated the same words. She pushed me. She made me do it. A sentence that echoed every domestic abuser who refuses to accept responsibility. News of the crime spread rapidly through Jeffersonville. People who knew the family were stunned. From the outside, Deborah appeared to be a loving mother, dedicated and soft-spoken. Stephen seemed quiet, reserved, and ordinary. No one ever imagined that a holiday like Valentine's Day, a night meant for affection, would become a symbol of death and betrayal in their community. Friends began posting tributes online. They shared photos of Deborah laughing at birthday parties, dressing up with her kids, volunteering at local events. They talked about her kindness, her patience, her gentle smile. They talked about how she always put her children first, how she tried to fix things even when she herself was breaking. People started asking the questions that always come after tragedy. Did she ever ask for help? Did she ever feel unsafe? Was there any warning? Could this have been prevented? Some said Deborah had confided small things, stress, arguments, emotional distance, but nothing that hinted at danger. Others said she seemed tired recently, as if carrying burdens she didn't know how to share. But no one imagined the burden was fear. The community held a candlelight vigil outside her home 3 days later. Hundreds gathered, holding candles against the winter wind, standing in silence as her children, now surrounded by relatives, clung to each other for warmth. The glow of the candles reflected in the eyes of people who wished they could turn back time, who wished they had known more, who wished someone could have saved her. While the community mourned, Stephen sat in a jail cell, replaying his version of events. He asked for a lawyer. He requested meals. He slept as if nothing about the world he destroyed weighed on him. The contrast was unbearable. A mother gone forever, 3 children facing a future without her, and a husband who felt only the consequences of his own actions, not the gravity of them. Investigators worked around the clock to prepare the case for court. They compiled every detail, every photograph, every statement. They wanted to ensure that Deborah's voice, the voice that had been silenced, would be heard loudly and unmistakably inside the courtroom. She would get justice. Her story would be told, and Stephen Meyer would be held accountable for the life he brutally ended. Part 3 will continue with the court proceedings, the emotional impact on the family, the community response, and how this case forever changed awareness around hidden domestic violence. Days passed, and the community around Deborah Meyer grew increasingly disturbed by the developments in the investigation. What had begun as a missing person search had transformed into a full-scale homicide inquiry, and every new detail released by police painted a darker picture than the last friends who had once spoken of Deborah's warmth and kindness were now grappling with the horrifying possibility that someone she trusted had betrayed her in the most brutal way. Inside the police department, detectives continued rebuilding the timeline with precision, reviewing every small inconsistency until the truth became unavoidable. One of the most troubling discoveries came when investigators re-examined several financial accounts connected to Deborah. During the week of her disappearance, unusually large withdrawals had been attempted from her bank account, withdrawals Deborah had never made before. The transactions were blocked due to incorrect verification answers, but the attempt itself suggested that someone had not only planned her disappearance, but also intended to benefit from it. That evidence, combined with the messages recovered from Joseph's phone, forced detectives to confront what many of them had suspected from the beginning. This crime was not spontaneous. It had layers, motives, and deliberate steps. Each day, the case that once seemed like a possible runaway or tragic accident now stood clearly as a cold, calculated act. Detectives returned for one final, comprehensive interview with Joseph. They laid out everything: the deleted messages, the timeline gaps, the witness statements, the financial attempts. At first, Joseph remained unnervingly calm, but as the questions became sharper, his composure cracked. His voice trembled, his breathing changed, and he stopped making eye contact. It became obvious that his story was collapsing under the weight of the evidence. Though he still refused to confess, the silence between his answers told investigators more than any admission could have. The breakthrough finally came when a forensic team uncovered a small but crucial stain beneath a section of torn carpet in the garage. Initial luminol testing indicated the presence of blood, and when the sample was sent to the lab, the results confirmed what everyone feared. It was Deborah's. This discovery erased any remaining hope of finding her alive. With this final piece of evidence, detectives secured an arrest warrant. On the morning of the raid, officers moved quietly through the neighborhood as residents peeked from their windows. Stunned by the swarm of patrol cars, Joseph stood on the porch as police approached, his face pale, hands shaking. When they placed him in handcuffs, he didn't protest. He didn't ask why. In that moment, it seemed as though he knew the truth had finally caught up with him. News of the arrest spread rapidly, igniting a wave of grief and anger across the community. Candlelight vigils were held in Deborah's honor, and her family, still devastated, expressed a mixture of heartbreak and relief. They still didn't have Deborah back, but at least the person responsible would face justice. Before major news outlets, Deborah's sister spoke with a quiet resolve, saying, "We will carry her memory forward. She deserved so much more than what happened to her." As the case moved into court, prosecutors presented a compelling chain of evidence. The messages showing tension, the suspicious financial activity, the blood stain in the garage, and the timeline that placed Joseph at the center of it all. Joseph's defense attempted to argue accidental death, panic, poor decisions, but the jury saw through the inconsistencies. After days of testimony and emotional accounts from Deborah's family. The verdict was read: guilty. The courtroom was silent as the words echoed through the chamber. Joseph stared forward, expression vacant, while Deborah's family quietly embraced one another. The judge delivered a lengthy sentence, ensuring he would not walk free again for decades. Yet even after the conviction, the tragedy carried a lingering weight. Deborah's body was never recovered, and that painful fact remained a wound that time could not fully heal. Her family continued to search, holding on to the hope that someday someone might come forward with the truth. They refused to let her memory fade into case files or court transcripts. Instead, they turned their grief into advocacy, raising awareness about domestic violence and supporting missing persons organizations, determined to give other families the closure they themselves were denied. In the end, the Deborah Meyer case became more than a story of crime. It became a reminder of how fragile trust can be, how quickly lives can be shattered, and how essential it is for communities to stand together when justice must be pursued. Deborah's life, taken far too soon, inspired a movement that would continue long after the courtroom lights dimmed. And though her story ended in heartbreak, her legacy endured, not defined by the darkness of what happened to her, but by the strength of the people who refused to forget her.